in 1987, the mother flew to this country 6 months ahead of her children. It was the hardest thing she ever had to do was leave her sons. To land into Montgomery County and face a harsh winter with no money, no job, and no idea what was going to happen. And she suffered greatly. 6 months later, she was reunited with her 2 sons in August of 1987. And while the reunion was glorious, it was also bittersweet because they were entering a very difficult life, a very harsh life. They didn't speak the language. They didn't know anyone. They lived in deep poverty. And the sons would return to a life of an abusive father, a life they had known their entire childhood. When the eldest became 15 and had enough of his father's abuse, had enough of the beatings on his brother and his mother, and started standing up to his father. And finally, the mom developed the courage to leave that marriage. The divorce became final 2 years later. With that came a new opportunity as well. On the day before the youngest 21st birthday, she married. And 4 months later, she was an American resident. And as wonderful as that was, what she didn't realize, or none of them understood, was that it would be 4 months too late for her residency to make an impact on the youngest life. That the first opportunity this young man had to become a part of this country was taken away by a matter of 4 months. It would not be the last. 6 months after his mother became a resident, the father got a sponsorship through his work, and he was now a legal member of the society. But it was 10 months too late for the youngest son. 3 months after that, the eldest son, his brother, married the love of his life, his wife, and he became a U.S. resident. But again, 13 months too late to make a difference in this young man's life. And they decided that it was time to take his life. And he got in his car and he drove to White's Ferry, to the little ferry there, because he had been there before and he knew there was a ramp. And he knew that he could just drive up that ramp, and at the time he didn't know how to swim, so he'd swim once the car hit the water. The undertow would pull him and he would find peace. But God had given him a gift many months before, a gift that would unknowingly save his life. That fall, he worked at a gym, and he was very charismatic and well liked by everyone. And one of the members of the gym asked him if he would consider teaching physical education at a private school across the street, which he responded, "I don't have a college degree, I'm not an educator, how can I do this?" But it was a private school and they don't necessarily follow the same rules. And so he was permitted to teach 1 hour a day, every day of the week, these 60 beautiful kids that he grew to love and adore. It was 20 at a time. He found that he had a gift for working with children. That was a great blessing that God had given him, and he really adored them. And when he sat in his car and he looked at the water, he had this interesting image of his car being pulled out of the water. And he thought to himself, what are the parents going to tell these kids? That they would call the guy coach. They would call him coach. They're going to ask, why did coach do this? Why did coach do this? And he knew that they would not have a good answer. He just didn't want to do that to those children or their parents. So he turned his car around and he drove home crying. And his mother must have known. His mother must have known that he was going through a lot of pain, because she drove up from Florida, where she had now moved to, and took him to the University of Maryland, to the admissions office, and she pleaded with this woman and begged this woman to help them. This person had no reason to care, had no reason to assist a couple of immigrants. And the woman, who is an angel that God had sent into their lives, helped them, let's say, bend the rules and find a way for him to receive admissions into the University of Maryland. And when he turned 18, all he wanted to do with his life was get a college education. When he had fallen to the hardest road, he just remembered, he just kept saying, what am I going to do without a college education? How am I going to have a life without a college education? And this woman created that pathway. In 2 years, he completed 70 credits. Without a dime to his name, he found a way to pay tuition. And I can tell you that the happiest day of his life is this. 5 weeks before graduation, he had one payment left to make on his tuition. And he walked up to that cashier, and he had a credit card with enough space for that payment. And he just knew that he had made it, that he was going to get his degree. And even if it took him the rest of his life to pay off that credit card, even if it took him decades to pay off, it was simply $500, but to him it was a fortune. That he had earned his degree, and that he would carry that for the rest of his life. And one of the things that he valued was education, and he felt that after a major failure, that the best path for him was to return to school. So he decided to go back to the University of Maryland and work for an MBA. But this time around, tuition would not be the $3,500 a semester that he was used to from his undergrad. This time around, the degree would cost him $100,000. Again, no access to loans, grants, scholarships. He fought hard and he's worked his way through, and he found a way to complete that degree. If you've ever seen the movie The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, who portrays Chris Gardner, in the book, or that film, I've read the book and seen the film, Chris Gardner discusses his life in series of this part of my life I call running, this part of my life I call getting stupid. Both the movie and the book conclude with Chris Gardner earning an internship that he believed would guide him into a better life. And this young man believed that when he completed that MBA, when he earned that degree, that he would be offered a job, and that job would be great. And that finally, when he earned that job, that part of his life, that little part of his life, would be called happiness. And so for 2 years, he exhausted every connection, every resource he had, desperately trying to find a job. Until he finally settled on a position that he didn't want. It was a job that had been made available to him upon graduation. But he wanted to follow his dreams. He wanted to work in an industry where he would make a difference. And this was a frivolous job that he didn't feel would allow him to serve the world. 2 years later, when the position became available again, he humbled himself and prayed to God, I get it, I understand. You want me to humble myself to be here. And he accepted that position. Two months before he took the job, President Obama had attempted to pass an extension of the law called DACA, which would remove the age limit. And he was all set to have his paperwork done. But 2 days before the approval of that expansion, a federal judge in Texas blocked the law and closed the pathway for any immigrant in his situation to find a pathway to citizenship in this country. Yet he was convinced that as long as he took this job, he'd be okay. Interestingly enough, he was hired in March, but they asked him if he would wait until April to start the onboarding process, because they had just changed the way they were doing their onboarding. And he would be the first employee to go through this new onboarding process. Terrified at this news, he researched the change. And what he learned was that this company, a very small company that normally wouldn't do background checks on someone like him, had now shifted to doing that starting that month, and that he would be the first to be afforded this opportunity. And there's a great irony in this story, because last April, I stood in this spot, and I preached a sermon that Easter. And I spoke of purpose, and I spoke of trusting God. And a week later, the person in this story walked into that situation with that job position. And when he lost the job for his residency status, he lost all hope. And while I was speaking of hope, this person and once again decided for the second time in his life, this time at a sheer exhaustion, that there was no point in continuing. He decided to end his life for the second time in his life. And the reason I say it's an irony is because the story that I've been telling you about this young man, about this family, it's my story. This is my life. When I accepted that job and I heard about the onboarding process, I pulled into that parking lot with all my paperwork in the high that I had from my sermon that Easter. It was so well taken, and I just sort of felt like God was with me. And I knew that if I believed hard enough, that all the promises my mother made me were true, and that God could work miracles. And I prayed for a miracle, and I believed that it would happen. And I remember praying this exact prayer: God, you don't want me to have the career I want? You don't want me to be a preacher, a pastor? I don't understand, but fine, I will accept it. God, you don't want me to get married? You don't want me to find love? I don't get that, because my whole life I wanted to love another person with all my heart and just be there for them. But if that is your will, I will accept it. And if you don't want me to have children, I will understand that too. It doesn't make sense to me because I'm so good with kids, but if that's your will, I will accept it. Just give me this job, God. Please give me this job. And I promise you, I will come here for the next 30 years and I will hide in this place. I will keep my mouth shut. I will bother no one. I will make no one aware of anything. I will just hide here. And I walked into that onboarding process and I knew that God was going to provide me a miracle. And within 5 minutes of the onboarding process, I was red flagged. And I couldn't help but chuckle because there was no drama to it. Even the thing that I didn't want was taken from me. And when I got in my car, I contacted my brother. And my brother simply said this: I know you don't want to hear this, but it's time to bite the bullet. It's time to pay someone. It's time to have an arranged marriage. It's time to work the system. You need to let this go. And for me, what most people would consider my biggest strength has cost me my most amount of pain, because I have always believed in being a man of honor. I have always believed in being a man of character. And I refused my entire life to cheat the system. I refused. I knew that it was more important for me to marry for love, to find the right person, to stand up for my morals and my values. And everyone that knew my situation was begging me to break all that. And I reacted in the strangest of ways. Instead of agreeing with them, I went home and I did something called a decision tree, which is what MBAs do to make difficult choices. And what my decision tree told me, that the most logical step, the most logical thing to do was to end my life, because I was a sunk cost, I was not providing value to society, and it was just time to go. And I was exhausted, and I just didn't need to continue. And I wrote a letter that was published in the Huffington Post last Friday. And the letter was to the people I respect, my mentors, people I love, people I trust. People who, for the past 2 years, have been pulling their hairs trying to figure out why I can't move forward with my life. They looked so disappointed in me every time they spoke to me and tried to figure out why I couldn't get a job. But before I ended it, I wanted them to know my situation. I think part of me hoped that they would react badly because it would give me an excuse to do what I was terrified to do. Among these people is a couple named Chris and Elizabeth Hayes, who I've known 15 years. And I was so certain that the day Chris found out about my situation, there'd be a knock on my door from immigration. And instead, their response changed my life. They wrote me a letter telling me how proud they were of me, how much they loved me, how much I meant to their life, how heartbroken they were over my situation, and how they would do anything and everything they could to help me. And it shocked me, to the point where I started telling more and more people, to the point where I told 400 people before the article was published. And not a single human being did what I always feared would happen. Not a single human being hated me, rejected me, made me feel like I was evil. And I realized that God had given me an incredible gift. A gift that I did not ask for, a gift that I did not deserve, and that a gift I never dreamed I could ever achieve, and that was this. Each one of those people told me what I meant to them in their lives. Each one of those persons told me how valuable I had been to their life. I told my mother so many times that I wish I'd never been born, and I remember thinking, I'm never going to have one of those It's a Wonderful Life moments. I'm never going to have one of those. And then one day, I'm sitting on my couch laughing because I'm thinking, what an amazing life I've lived. Maybe I don't have riches, maybe I don't have fame, maybe I don't have worldly success, but if 400 people could take the time to tell me that I've actually meant something to their life, then maybe my life wasn't such a waste. We don't want your pity. We don't want you to feel sorry for us, because what I've learned is this, that my life is not any harder than yours. Not even a slightly little bit harder than yours. Life is just hard. It's so hard for everyone. And this is just the tribulations that I have to deal with. And I told the Washington Post reporter, when this gets fixed, when this gets resolved, I'm going to be blessed with a series of new problems. And I'm going to have to deal with those too. And life is just going to continue to be hard. So I don't want you guys, or we don't want you guys to feel bad for us. Because your life is equally hard. You have equal challenges. What I've learned is this. What makes life tolerable, what makes life enjoyable, what makes life amazing is people, each other. When we stand with each other, when we communicate with each other, when we tell each other what we mean, when we're transparent, when we're honest, when we love each other. Whatever our trials are, we'll get through them together. And there really is a problem in this country, and all we really need to resolve it is for people to care, for people to understand that this is a situation that affects everyone. I'm one person, but my life has touched 400 people that I know of. And out of this room, I only know of one that I told before the story. So it's possible that I've touched hundreds more. We all touch each other's lives. It doesn't matter where we were born. If we're living in the same space, in the same area, we make an impact, some good, some bad. But it doesn't have to be bad, we choose to be good. And for most immigrants, like my mother, who babysitted children her entire life here, she just wanted to contribute and raise her sons. And that's what most of us want. People are horrified when they hear that I was considering suicide, but the truth of the matter is, if I hadn't hit that low point, if I hadn't hit a point where I wanted to end it, I never would have told anyone. I would have carried on miserable and unhappy. And after sharing my story, I have found a joy that I could never have realized without being open and honest about who I am. I think what makes my story remarkable is this, is that I didn't break. See, politics, people, even God gave me every reason to give up on my faith. Gave me every reason to stop believing, to feel sorry for myself, to make myself out to a victim. And I think that's true of all of us, that our challenges in our life puts us in positions where we choose not to face what's in front of us. We choose to believe that our challenges are greater than what we can handle. And it's probably true, they are, alone, but together we can do more. I think what makes my story remarkable is that somehow, through all the labyrinth, through all the pain, through all the suffering, I somehow came out better, I somehow came out stronger, I somehow came out with a deeper faith than I had in my life. And even though this year has been rough, and I know that what's to come is going to be harder, and understand that as I took the story public, my life has become a lot harder. I am facing challenges that I knew would come, but they are horrible. I have had to say goodbye to people and places that I love. I have had to sacrifice so much, but I am still grateful for every moment of my life. Every pain, every suffering, from my father's abuse to my grandmother's abuse, because it all developed who I became today. And what God has given me this year that I hope to use for the rest of my life to make the world a better place is that I found out who I am. And I'm better than I was, I'm more than I am. And who I am today is the man that I always wanted to be. I became the man that I prayed my whole life I would be, someone of honor, of strength, of courage, who's willing to face challenges, who's willing to stand up against a world that rejects them. Because Gandhi said, you have to be the change you want to see in the world. And if my immigration situation is going to get fixed, it's because I took action. But for me, it's deeper. I want to help others. And all of this came from my suffering. All of this came from my pain. So I would just share with you that whatever you're going through, whatever you're enduring, don't reject it. Don't be frustrated by it. Don't be beaten by it. Embrace it, conquer it, and face it. And you will wake up the next morning. I pray that you have a life as lucky as the one I've had. I've been told by my attorney that I am the unluckiest person he's ever met, and yet I feel like the luckiest man in the world. I am dead broke now. I am unemployed, and I am unemployable, and I feel like the richest man in the world. I don't know what the future holds, and mostly uncertainty, and it's possible that I could be deported, and I feel like a success, like a great success, because people care about me, because people believe in me. Just trust God and give your life to each other, and together we will be okay.
All right. Amen.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story of my life.